The first day of the semester always buzzed with a nervous energy that I found infectious. I leaned back in my chair, watching students filter into the lecture hall, some familiar, others fresh-faced and wide-eyed. My job was to guide them through the complexities of literature, but truth be told, I got just as much out of these encounters as they did. "Professor Evan, right?" I looked up, meeting the gaze of a young student standing in my office doorway. They had that mix of excitement and fear that I'd seen 1,000 times before. "That's me," I replied, offering a warm smile. "What can I do for you?" "I'm Alex. I just transferred here, and I've heard this department is, well, different." They hesitated, shifting from one foot to the other. "In a good way, I mean." I motioned for them to sit. "Different how?" Alex settled into the chair, a nervous energy radiating from them. I've always struggled to find a space where my identity non-binary is fully embraced, but everyone here talks about how inclusive it is. I nodded, understanding the weight behind their words. "We believe in the power of diverse voices, Alex. You're in the right place." Their shoulders visibly relaxed. "That's really good to hear. Literature has always been my escape, my way of making sense of everything." We talked a bit more about their favorite authors, their passion for storytelling, and by the time they left, I felt that familiar spark of connection. It was an unusual part of the job was connecting with students on some level, but something about Alex stood out. After they left, I found myself staring at the door, wondering what it was. There was something in their words, their presence, that lingered longer than it should have. The day moved on, but the thought didn't leave me. The semester had just begun, and already I could sense that it was going to be different, maybe even challenging, in ways I hadn't anticipated. As I packed up to head home, I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't just the start of another year. It was the start of something much bigger, though I couldn't quite put my finger on what it was yet. Maybe it was just nerves. Maybe it was nothing. Or maybe, just maybe, it was everything. The next few days were a blur of lectures, grading, and endless cups of coffee. I was knee-deep in papers when I heard a knock on my office door. "Come in," I called, not looking up from the stack of essays. "Evan, you've got to check this out," a voice said, full of energy. I glanced up to see Alex practically bouncing on their toes, holding a worn book. "What is it?" I asked, leaning back in my chair, curious. "Professor Emil Hartmann," they said, as if the name alone was enough explanation. When I didn't immediately react, they continued, "He's new to the department, and he's amazing. I mean, his lectures are something else." I raised an eyebrow. "Emil Hartmann, huh? I haven't had the pleasure yet." "You should. He's doing a spoken word session at the rec center tonight. You should come. His poetry, it's raw, real. You'll love it." There was something in Alex's enthusiasm that was contagious. I'd been in the department for years, seen professors come and go, but rarely did anyone get this kind of reaction from the students. "All right," I said, closing the folder in front of me. "You've convinced me, I'll check it out." That evening I found myself in the small, dimly lit rec center, surrounded by students who were clearly already smitten with Professor Hartmann. The room buzzed with anticipation, and I couldn't help but feel a little curious. What kind of professor could generate this kind of excitement? When Emil finally took the stage, the room fell silent. He was tall, with a commanding presence, yet there was an ease about him that made everyone instantly comfortable. He started speaking, and within moments I understood why Alex was so taken with him. His words were sharp, cutting through the air with precision, yet they carried an undercurrent of vulnerability that made them hit harder. It was like nothing I'd ever heard, a blend of intellect and emotion seamlessly woven together. And then there was something else, something in the way he moved, the way his eyes scanned the room. A kind of intensity that drew you in, made you want to know more. As I watched him, a strange sensation crept over me. It wasn't just admiration for his talent, there was something deeper, something I hadn't felt in a long time. It was unsettling, and yet I couldn't look away. After the session ended, I found myself lingering in the back of the room, watching as students gathered around him, eager to speak, to connect. Alex caught my eye and waved me over. "So what did you think?" they asked, practically vibrating with excitement. "He's compelling," I said, choosing my words carefully. "There's definitely something special about him." "I knew you'd like it," Alex grinned. "You should meet him. He's over there." I hesitated for a moment before making my way toward Emil. He was deep in conversation with a group of students but looked up as I approached. "Evan, right?" he said, extending his hand. "I've heard a lot about you." "All good things, I hope," I replied, shaking his hand. His grip was firm, his smile easy. "Mostly," he said with a wink. "It's nice to finally meet you." We talked briefly, small talk, mostly, but there was an underlying tension, an awareness that we were both trying to size each other up. By the time I left, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was the beginning of something. What exactly, I didn't know, but I was sure of one thing: Professor Emil Hartman wasn't someone I could easily ignore. As I walked out into the cool night air, I replayed our conversation in my head. There was something about Emil that stirred something inside me, something I wasn't sure I wanted to acknowledge yet. But there it was, undeniable and persistent. And just like that, the semester that had started so normally was suddenly anything but. The next morning, I couldn't get Emil out of my head. There was something about him, his presence, his words that lingered, gnawing at the edges of my thoughts. I was grading papers in my office when Alex popped in again, unannounced, as if they knew I needed a distraction. "So did you enjoy the session last night?" they asked, dropping into the chair across from me. "I did," I admitted. "He's impressive." "I told you," Alex said, beaming. "He's got this way of making you feel like you're the only person in the room, right? Like his words are meant just for you." I nodded, still trying to shake the strange feeling Emil had left me with. "Yeah, he does. It's powerful." Alex leaned in, lowering their voice as if sharing a secret. "He's also openly gay, you know. Some students were talking about it after the session." That caught me off guard. Not because it mattered who someone loved was their business, but because it added another layer to the complexity I already felt around him. "Is that so?" I said, keeping my tone neutral. "Yeah," Alex continued, oblivious to my inner turmoil. "And he's not just a good teacher, he's a great person. You two should collaborate or something. I think you'd make a fantastic team." I laughed it off, but the idea planted itself in my mind. Could I really work closely with him, knowing that this unease I felt wasn't going away, or was it something else entirely? That evening, I found myself in the faculty lounge, nursing a cup of coffee when Emil walked in. He spotted me, and, with that easy smile, made his way over. "Evan, mind if I join you?" he asked, already pulling out a chair. "Not at all," I replied, trying to sound casual. He sat down, placing his coffee on the table, and we exchanged the usual pleasantries. But soon, the conversation turned to literature, as it often does in our line of work. "I was thinking," Emil said after a while, "about what Alex mentioned, the possibility of us working together on something." I raised an eyebrow. "Alex mentioned that to you?" He chuckled. "They're enthusiastic, aren't they? But seriously, I think it could be interesting. I've been thinking about a research project on the representation of LGBTQ identities in modern literature. It's something I'm passionate about, and from what I've heard, you have a lot of insight to offer." There was the opportunity to get closer, to see what this connection was really about. My mind raced, weighing the pros and cons. I could say no, keep things professional and at arm's length, but something inside me resisted that idea, something that wanted to see where this might lead. "I'd be open to it," I said finally, my voice betraying none of the conflict swirling inside me. "Great," Emil said, smiling in a way that made my chest tighten. "Let's set up a time to brainstorm." As we talked logistics, I found myself drawn into his energy, his passion for the subject. It was hard not to be. But the more we talked, the more I realized that working with Emil might be more challenging than I'd anticipated, not because of the work itself, but because of the way he made me feel. By the time we wrapped up, I was more conflicted than ever. This wasn't just a professional interest, it was personal, and that scared me. I knew I was walking a fine line, but for some reason, I couldn't bring myself to step back. As I left the lounge, I caught a glimpse of Emil talking with another professor, his laugh echoing down the hall. I should have felt relieved that the conversation was over, but all I felt was a nagging pull, a desire to stay close, to see what might happen next. It was clear that whatever this was between us, it wasn't going away. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't know if that was a good thing or not. Days passed, and the idea of collaborating with Emil moved from a casual conversation to something real. We agreed to meet at my office after classes to flesh out our ideas. The moment he walked in, I could feel the air shift like the room had been waiting for him to fill it. Emil set his bag down and flashed that easy smile. Ready to dive in? Absolutely, I replied, pushing aside my internal conflict and focusing on the work at hand. We had chosen to explore the representation of LGBTQ identities in literature, a topic that was as personal for him as it was intellectually stimulating for me. We sat close, poring over texts, bouncing ideas off each other. The hours flew by. Emil's passion was contagious, and soon I found myself completely immersed in the project, forgetting, at least for the moment, the turmoil his presence stirred in me. As the evening wore on, the conversation began to drift from academic theories to personal stories. Emil leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. When I was younger, there weren't many books where I saw myself where I felt represented. I nodded, understanding the importance of his words. That's why this work is so crucial. Literature shapes how we see the world and ourselves. Exactly, he said, his eyes meeting mine. And it's why I've been so focused on making sure my students, people like Alex, feel seen, heard. His openness caught me off guard. It wasn't just his dedication to the project that drew me in, it was his willingness to be vulnerable, to share a piece of himself. I could feel the walls between us crumbling, bit by bit. I glanced at the clock. It was late, but neither of us seemed ready to call it a night. The conversation had taken on a life of its own, and I wasn't sure I wanted it to end. Emil seemed to sense my hesitation. He leaned forward slightly, lowering his voice as if to confide in me. Evan, can I ask you something personal? Of course, I said, though my pulse quickened. Why did you choose to focus on this topic? There are so many areas of literature you could have pursued, but you chose this one. I hesitated, caught off guard by the question. It was a fair one, and I knew I couldn't dodge it without revealing something deeper. I guess, because I've always felt that literature should reflect the full spectrum of human experience. It's about more than just studying the text, it's about connecting with it, feeling seen in it. He nodded, his gaze intense, like he was searching for something in my words. And do you feel seen, Evan? The question hung in the air between us, heavier than anything we'd discussed so far. I didn't have an answer, not one I was ready to share anyway. But the way Emil looked at me, the way his voice softened when he said my name, made me realize that this wasn't just about the project anymore. This was about us, and whatever was quietly simmering beneath the surface. I think I began slowly, choosing my words carefully, that maybe this project is helping me figure that out. Emil's lips curled into a small, knowing smile. Maybe it's helping both of us. There it was, the shift. We had crossed an invisible line, moved from mere colleagues to something more complicated, more intimate. I could feel the tension crackling in the air, something unspoken passing between us. Before I could dwell on it, Emil stood up, stretching his arms. We've made a lot of progress tonight. How about we pick this up again tomorrow? Yeah, that sounds good, I replied, though my mind was still stuck on our conversation. He gathered his things, and as he moved towards the door, he paused, looking back at me. Evan, he said, his voice softer now, I'm glad we're doing this together. Me too, I managed, my voice betraying the emotions I was trying so hard to keep in check. He gave me one last smile before slipping out of the room, leaving me alone with my thoughts. The door clicked shut, but the tension remained, swirling around me like a tangible presence. As I sat there in the dim light of my office, I knew one thing for certain: there was no turning back now. Whatever was happening between Emil and me, it was real, and it was only going to get more complicated from here. The following days blurred together in a mix of lectures, research, and late-night meetings with Emil. Our project was coming together beautifully, but the more time we spent together, the harder it became to ignore the tensions simmering beneath the surface. One evening, after wrapping up a particularly productive session, Emil suggested grabbing a drink. We've earned it, he said with a grin that made it impossible to refuse. We ended up at a quiet bar near campus, tucked away in a corner booth with drinks in hand. The conversation flowed easily at first, discussions about literature, our students, the usual topics. But as the night wore on and the drinks loosened our tongues, the conversation turned more personal. Emil said, swirling the ice in his glass, I've always admired how you interact with your students. They really look up to you. I shrugged, feeling a bit uncomfortable with the praise. I try to be there for them, Give them a space where they can express themselves without fear. Yeah, he said, his gaze lingering on mine, you do that really well. It's something I've noticed, about you in general. You make people feel safe. There was something in his tone, something that made my chest tighten. I wanted to deflect, to change the subject, but instead I found myself leaning in, captivated by the intensity in his eyes. Emil, I started, not even sure what I was about to say. But he didn't let me finish. Evan, I think there's something we've both been avoiding, something we need to talk about. The air between us thickened with unspoken words. My pulse quickened, but I couldn't bring myself to look away. Emil, what are you getting at? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. I don't want to make things awkward between us, especially with the work we're doing, but I can't ignore this anymore. There's something here, between us. I know you feel it too. My heart raced, and for a moment I was tempted to deny it, to keep things buried. But the look in his eyes, the vulnerability he was showing, made it impossible to lie. I do feel it, I admitted, the words coming out more easily than I expected. But I don't know what to do about it. Emil nodded, a small smile playing on his lips. I'm not sure either, but I know that whatever this is, it's important. And I don't want to let it slip away without seeing where it could lead. We sat there in silence for a moment, the weight of the conversation settling over us. The bar around us seemed to fade away, leaving just the two of us in our little bubble of uncertainty. What about the project? I asked, finally breaking the silence. Won't this complicate things? Maybe, Emil said, shrugging. But I think it would be more complicated if we kept pretending there was nothing happening between us. He was right, of course. We could continue to work together, keep things professional, and ignore the growing attraction. But the truth was, it was already affecting us, creeping into every interaction, every conversation. I guess we can't keep running from it, I said, more to myself than to him. No, he agreed, his voice soft but firm. We can't. The decision hung in the air between us, unspoken but understood. We had crossed a line, and there was no going back. The project, our friendship, everything was about to change. And as scary as that was, it was also exhilarating. Let's just take it one step at a time, Emil suggested, reaching across the table to place his hand over mine. The touch was warm, grounding, and suddenly, all the fear I'd been feeling melted away. One step at a time, I echoed, squeezing his hand in return. As we sat there, hands entwined, I realized that this wasn't just a moment of truth for our relationship, it was a turning point for me. For the first time, I wasn't running from my feelings. I was embracing them, ready to see where they might lead, no matter how uncertain the path ahead might be. And in that moment, I knew that whatever came next, we'd face it together. The days following our conversation at the bar were both exhilarating and nerve-wracking. Emil and I tried to keep things professional, but the undercurrent of what had been said and what hadn't was impossible to ignore. We continued working on our project, but every glance, every touch of his hand as he passed me a book or a note, carried a weight that hadn't been there before. One afternoon, as we were deep into discussing the nuances of our paper, there was a knock on the door. Without waiting for a response, Professor Landon, one of the senior faculty members, walked in. He was a no-nonsense type, always focused on tradition and the proper order of things. Evan, Emil, he said, nodding to each of us. I hope I'm not interrupting. Not at all, Emil replied smoothly, though I could sense the tension in his voice. We were just going over some research. Landon's gaze shifted between us, sharp and assessing. I've heard good things about this collaboration of yours. Interesting topic. Thank you, I said, trying to sound as casual as possible. We're making good progress. Glad to hear it, he said, but there was something in his tone, something that put me on edge. I've been meaning to talk to you both about the importance of maintaining a professional environment, especially when it comes to collaborative projects. It's crucial that personal matters don't interfere with the work. The implication was clear, and I felt a cold knot form in my stomach. How much did he know? Or was this just a warning, a way to keep us in check? Of course, Emil said, his voice steady. We're both committed to the integrity of this project. Good, Landon said, lingering for a moment longer than necessary. That's what I like to hear. We all have reputations to uphold. With that, he turned and left, leaving the door open behind him. The silence in the room was suffocating. Emil was the first to speak, his voice low. "Do you think he knows?" "I don't know," I admitted, my mind racing. "But it's clear he suspects something." Emil cursed under his breath, running a hand through his hair. "This is exactly what I was worried about. If word gets out." "We'll deal with it," I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. "We haven't done anything wrong." "But you know how this place is," Evan, Emil said, frustration creeping into his voice. "People talk, and once rumors start, it's hard to stop them." He was right, of course. Willowbrook University had a way of magnifying every little piece of gossip until it became something monstrous, and if people started talking about us, it wouldn't be long before the administration got involved. "We'll just have to be careful," I said, though the words felt hollow. "Keep things as professional as possible." Emil looked at me, his eyes filled with a mixture of worry and something else, something that made my chest tighten. "I don't want to lose this, Evan. I don't want to lose us." "You won't," I said, reaching out to take his hand. "We'll figure it out. Together." But even as I said it, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were heading into dangerous territory. The project that had brought us together was now a potential minefield, and with every step, the stakes got higher. Over the next few days, the tension only grew. Landon's words hung over us like a dark cloud, and I found myself constantly looking over my shoulder, wondering who might be watching, who might be whispering. Emil and I tried to keep our distance, but it was impossible to go back to the way things were. Every interaction was charged, every meeting filled with a mixture of anticipation and dread. The strain began to show. We snapped at each other over minor disagreements, the pressure of keeping up appearances while dealing with our growing feelings taking its toll. The closeness that had once felt so natural now felt dangerous, and the walls we'd tried to keep from crumbling were starting to crack. One evening, after a particularly tense day, Emil showed up at my door, looking worn out. "I can't keep doing this," he said, the exhaustion evident in his voice, "pretending like nothing's happening when everything is." I let him in, closing the door behind us. "I know," I said, feeling the same weariness, "but what choice do we have?" He slumped onto the couch, running a hand over his face. "I don't know, but I hate this hiding, this fear. It's eating me alive." I sat down beside him, the distance between us both physical and emotional. We knew this wouldn't be easy. "Yeah, but I didn't think it would be this hard," he said, his voice breaking slightly. I don't know how much longer I can take it." The pain in his words cut through me, and for the first time I realized just how much this was costing him. Costing both of us. "Maybe we need to take a step back," I said quietly, though the thought of it tore at me, just until things calmed down. Emil looked at me, his eyes filled with anguish. "Is that what you want?" "No," I said, the words slipping out before I could stop it. "But I don't want to lose you either. And right now it feels like we're on the edge of something we can't control." He nodded, though I could see the hurt in his eyes. "Maybe you're right." The words hung between us, heavy with the weight of everything unsaid. We sat in silence, side by side but miles apart, both of us knowing that whatever came next, it would change everything. The days following our decision to step back were some of the hardest I'd ever faced. Emil and I still saw each other regularly, working on our project, but the distance we'd put between us was palpable. It was like walking on eggshells, both of us too afraid to cross a line that had once felt so natural. One afternoon, as we were wrapping up a meeting in my office, Emil sighed heavily, breaking the silence that had settled over us. "Evan, I don't know how much longer I can keep this up. Pretending everything's fine when it's not." I looked at him, feeling the same exhaustion, the same frustration. "I know, it's killing me too." He ran a hand through his hair, something he did when he was trying to hold it together. "I've been thinking, maybe it's time to stop hiding. I'm tired of living in fear of what others might think. Maybe we need to be honest about everything." His words hung in the air, heavy with implications. "Are you sure? Once we do this, there's no going back." Emil met my gaze, his eyes filled with determination. "I'm sure. I'm done letting fear dictate my life. We both deserve better than this." I wanted to agree, to tell him that I was ready too, but the truth was, I wasn't sure. The risks were enormous. Our careers, our reputations, everything we'd worked so hard for could be jeopardized. But as I looked into his eyes, I knew he was right. We couldn't keep living this half-life, constantly looking over our shoulders. "We'll do it together," then I said, my voice steady despite the knot of fear in my stomach. "But we need to be smart about it. We need to prepare for whatever fallout might come." Emil nodded, a small smile tugging at his lips. "I knew you'd see it that way. That's why I've already made the first move." My heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean?" "I've scheduled a meeting with Professor Landon and the department head. Tomorrow. I'm going to tell them everything about us, about our relationship, and why it won't affect the project or our professionalism." I stared at him, shock coursing through me. "You did what?" "I know it's sudden," he said quickly, "but I thought it was the best way. We confront this head-on, together, and show them that we're serious, that we're not ashamed." The room seemed to close in on me. This was happening too fast, far faster than I'd anticipated. "Emil, this could ruin us." "Or it could set us free," he countered, his voice firm. "I don't want to live in the shadows anymore, Evan. I want to be with you, openly, without fear." I could see the resolve in his eyes, and it terrified me. But it also inspired me. Emil was willing to risk everything for us, and as scared as I was, I couldn't let him face this alone. "All right," I said finally, my voice steadying. "We'll go in there together, and we'll face whatever comes." The next day I walked into that meeting with a mix of dread and determination. Emil was already there, sitting calmly across from Professor Landon and Dr. Pierce, the department head. He gave me a reassuring smile as I took the seat beside him. "Thank you both for meeting with us," Emil began, his voice confident. "There's something we need to discuss, something important." Landon's expression was unreadable, but Dr. Pierce looked mildly concerned. "What's this about, Emil?" "It's about our relationship," Emil said, not hesitating. "Evan and I, we've developed feelings for each other, and we believe it's important to be transparent about that." The room fell silent, the air thick with tension. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest as I waited for their response. Landon was the first to speak, his voice measured. "This is highly unorthodox. You're both aware of the university's policies on relationships between faculty members, particularly when it comes to collaborative projects." "We are," Emil said, his tone unwavering, "but we're also confident that our relationship will not interfere with our work or our professional conduct. We've already proven that we can work together effectively, and will continue to do so." Dr. Pierce leaned back in his chair, scrutinizing us both. "This is a serious matter. You understand the potential implications, not just for yourselves but for the department as a whole." "We do," I said, finding my voice, "and we're prepared to handle whatever consequences may come. But we wanted to be honest about our relationship rather than continuing to hide it." The silence that followed was unbearable. I could feel the weight of their judgment, the possible repercussions of this confession hanging over us like a dark cloud. Finally, Dr. Pierce spoke. "I appreciate your honesty, but this will need to be discussed further with the university administration. There are procedures in place for situations like this, and we'll need to follow them." Landon's gaze was sharp. "This could lead to a formal inquiry. You're both willing to accept that?" Emil didn't flinch. "We are." With that, the meeting was adjourned, and we left the room, the tension still clinging to us like a second skin. Outside, Emil let out a long breath, his shoulders relaxing for the first time. "That went better than I expected," he said, trying to sound optimistic. "Better?" I asked, incredulous. "They're going to investigate us, Emil. This could get ugly." "But we did it," he said, turning to face me, his eyes shining with conviction. "We took control of our story, Evan. No more hiding, no more fear. Whatever happens next, we face it together." I wanted to believe him, wanted to share in his optimism, but all I could think about were the consequences. Still, as I looked at him, standing there with a mixture of hope and determination, I knew I couldn't back down now. "Together," I agreed, taking his hand, "no matter what." As we walked away, hand in hand, I felt a strange mixture of relief and dread. We'd made our move, taken a stand, but the real battle was just beginning. And as much as I wanted to believe in our strength, the uncertainty of what lay ahead was impossible to ignore. But for now we had each other, and that, at least, was something. The days following our meeting with Landon and Dr. Pierce were some of the longest and most tense I'd ever experienced. Emil and I tried to go about our usual routines, but the looming threat of an inquiry hung over us like a dark cloud. Every glance from a colleague felt loaded with suspicion, every conversation tinged with unspoken questions. We continued working on our project, but the easy camaraderie we'd shared was now strained by the pressure of the unknown. Still, we faced it together, leaning on each other for support in a way that only deepened the bond between us. Then, one afternoon as I was wrapping up a lecture, my phone buzzed with a message from Emil: "We need to talk. Meet me in the quad." My heart sank. After everything we'd been through, I couldn't shake the fear that this was it, the moment everything would come crashing down. I made my way to the quad, where I found Emil sitting on a bench, under the shade of a large oak tree, looking more serious than I'd ever seen him. He looked up as I approached, his expression unreadable. "Hey." "Hey," I replied, sitting down beside him. "What's going on?" He took a deep breath, then turned to face me. "I just got out of a meeting with Dr. Pierce. The university has decided not to pursue a formal inquiry." For a moment I couldn't process his words. "What? They're not going to investigate us?" Emil shook his head, a small smile forming on his lips. "No. Pierce said they reviewed our work, our conduct, and couldn't find any grounds for concern. He did warn us to remain professional, of course, but as far as they're concerned, the matter is closed." Relief flooded through me, so intense it left me dizzy. That's incredible. I can't believe it." "I know," Emil said, his smile widening. "It's like a huge weight's been lifted." We sat there in silence for a moment, letting the reality of the situation sink in. The fear that had haunted us for weeks was suddenly gone, replaced by a sense of peace that I hadn't felt in what seemed like forever. But there was still something unresolved, something I knew we couldn't avoid any longer. "Emil," I began, my voice soft, "what happens now? With us, I mean." He looked at me, his eyes filled with a warmth that sent a shiver down my spine. "I think that's up to us, Evan. We've been through so much together already. I don't want to hide anymore, but I also don't want to rush into anything just because we can." I nodded, understanding his hesitation. We've been living under so much pressure. Maybe we need to just breathe for a while, figure out what we really want. "Exactly," he said, reaching out to take my hand. "I care about you, Evan, more than I've cared about anyone in a long time, but I think we need to give ourselves the space to let this happen naturally, without the fear or the urgency that's been driving us." For the first time in weeks, I felt a sense of calm settle over me. I want that too. We don't have to have all the answers right now. Emil squeezed my hand, his smile softening. "No, we don't. We just need to be honest with each other and with ourselves." The sun was setting, casting a warm, golden light over the campus. As we sat there hand in hand, I realized that this was what I'd been searching for all along: someone who understood me, who was willing to face the challenges with me, but also someone who knew when to take a step back and let things unfold naturally. "We'll figure it out," I said, more certain than ever. "One step at a time." "One step at a time," Emil echoed, leaning in to press a soft kiss to my cheek. "Together." As we sat there, watching the sun dip below the horizon, I knew that whatever came next, we were ready for it. The fear, the uncertainty, all of it had led us here, to this moment of clarity and connection. And as the campus slowly emptied around us, leaving just the two of us in the quiet, I felt a deep sense of peace settle in my chest. We had faced the storm together and come out stronger on the other side. Now, it was time to build something new, something that was ours, free from fear or hiding. For the first time in a long time, I felt hopeful. Whatever the future held, I knew we would face it together, with honesty, trust, and the love that had grown between us, despite all the odds. And that, I realized, was more than enough.